some intellectual slaves reviewed correspondence from local officials, worked as interpreter and evaluated petitions to the king. It was a bit awkward and strange that slaves were in charge of the tasks of such a high-ranking personnel, but it was quite natural in ancient Rome at that time. There were also slaves serving as hairstylists, decorating their master's hair, and slaves serving as record keepers who remembered what their masters had to remember. The slaves mentioned above show how dependent ancient Roman society was on their labor. The slaves who worked for the royal family or took charge of stores resembled today's office workers. They were slaves with their own important status. You might think that slaves would have been treated well, according to the specialized type of business they were engaged in, but that was never the case. Slaves could be better off than other slaves, but were still only slaves. Even the servant slaves, who had a better life, suffered from a lot of work, and the slaves engaged in labor such as agriculture and mining lived a life that was barely tolerable. If you look at slavery in any part of the world, the ancient Roman slaves were treated as livestock or objects. Even ancient Roman law continued to emphasize that slaves have no personhood. The famous philosopher Plato even referred to slaves as a tool that was talking. Among the slaves of ancient Rome, all those engaged in labor wore necklaces and phrases on them. The words on the necklace were, "I am a runaway serf. Please arrest me." Roman culture was unique, but the treatment of slaves was as cruel and inhumane as in any other country. They weren't treated as people in the first place. The slave trade was also commonplace in ancient Rome. The places where the slave trade began in earnest were the eastern Mediterranean and the island of Delos. Ancient Romans were able to trade a variety of slaves because there were many different races and fields of work. It is said that an average of 10,000 slaves were traded every day, which shows once again how many slaves there were in ancient Rome. The price of slaves fluctuated between 300 and 2,500 denarius in Nero's time. For a skilled man, it was around 2,000 denarius. Beautiful women were usually sold as sex slaves, costing between 4,000 and 6,000 denarius. For reference, the annual income of the middle class at that time was 2,000 denarius. The price of slavery was exorbitantly high. Child's ballets work depicting a scene where the sale of slaves is in full swing gives you a glimpse of the slave market. The Roman soldiers smiling at the naked children, and the slave market behind them are a testament to the brutality of Roman slavery at that time. However, in ancient Rome, there were often cases of liberation from slavery. Nevertheless, slaves from other regions and from different areas often had to live as slaves until they died. Ancient Rome had a culture that periodically freed slaves. The reason slaves were regularly freed was because many new prisoners of war came in so often. As Rome often waged wars, the intention was to supplement the forces that would go into battle with the slaves, which was possible because Rome itself was such an open society. As slavery expanded, ancient Rome suffered from slave revolts. In the first place, slavery was forced to work for prisoners of war, so slaves did not have any loyalty to their masters. The only way to effectively manage slaves in this situation was to give them a sense of fear. Of course, this approach may not have applied to obedient professional slaves, but among the slaves who did physical work, Spartacus, a gladiator slave, created a stronger sense of fear. Slaves who had been treated unjustly and inhumanely began to revolt. Slavery revolts were commonly called slave wars. The slave wars were the Sicilian slave rebellion, which corresponds to the First and Second Slave Wars, and the Spartacus rebellion, which corresponds to the Third Slave War. The Second Slave War started for an odd reason. Marius asked the Italian allies for assistance, but the Italian allies refused, citing the use of Italian slaves. Marius freed 800 Italian slaves. The problem was that the non-Italian slaves in Sicily at that time escaped, thinking that they too would be liberated, rebelled in anger when they were told that those who thought they had escaped slavery would return to slavery.